The bell above the diner door jingled softly, its sound barely cutting through the hum of the fluorescent lights and the faint clatter of dishes in the kitchen. It was late, too late for most customers, and Clara had just begun wiping down the counters, preparing to close up. The smell of frying oil and brewed coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the soft strains of an old jazz tune crackling from the radio. She glanced up at the sound, her tired eyes landing on the figure who had entered. He was hunched over, his tattered coat several sizes too large, its edges frayed and dirty. A wool cap pulled low over his face did little to hide his weathered skin and grizzled beard. His shoes, mismatched and worn, scuffed loudly against the tile floor as he shuffled toward a booth in the corner. Clara hesitated, her cleaning cloth suspended midair. Customers at this hour were rare enough, and this man looked out of place even in the modest diner. But something in the stoop of his shoulders or the way he avoided her gaze stirred a pang of empathy in her. "Be right with you," she called, forcing cheer into her voice. The man mumbled something unintelligible, settling into the booth with a slow, deliberate movement. His hands trembled slightly as he fidgeted with a salt shaker, his nails thick and blackened with grime. Clara set the cloth aside, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached. "What can I get you tonight?" she asked, her voice soft. The man didn't look up. "Don't got much," he muttered, his voice raspy. "Was just hopin', if you had any leftovers, maybe. Something folks didn't finish." Her heart clenched. She glanced toward the kitchen window, where the last of the orders from earlier sat under a weak heat lamp. A dried-out burger patty and a few cold fries. "That's not right," she thought. "Give me a second," she said, turning before he could protest. She walked briskly to the counter, her mind already made up. Pulling a fresh plate from the stack, she ladled a steaming bowl of soup from the pot, adding a thick slice of bread and a small side of coleslaw. It wasn't much, but it was warm and decent, far better than scraps. She set the plate on a tray, grabbed a glass of water, and brought them back to the man. "Here you go," she said, setting the tray down carefully. The man looked up at her for the first time, his watery blue eyes studying her face. "You didn't have to do that," he murmured, his voice thick with something between gratitude and disbelief. Clara smiled, shrugging. "Everyone deserves a good meal. Enjoy." She turned away quickly, feeling his gaze linger on her as she walked back to the counter. As she resumed her cleaning, she couldn't shake the strange feeling the encounter had left behind. There was something different about this man, though she couldn't quite place what it was. Behind her, the stranger picked up his spoon with a steadying breath, savoring the kindness in every bite. The diner settled into a gentle stillness as the man slowly ate his meal. Clara moved about quietly, clearing tables and wiping down surfaces, her mind drifting to her schedule for the next day. Another double shift, then a few hours at her second job. Sleep would be a luxury, as always. When she passed by his table, the man spoke, startling her. "Thank you for this," he said, his voice low but earnest. She paused, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "It's no trouble," she replied. The man hesitated, his gaze dropping to the plate. "You don't see that often," he murmured. "Kindness." Clara pulled out a chair and sat across from him. The diner was empty now, and she didn't mind taking a moment. "Kindness doesn't cost anything," she said, her tone gentle. He looked up at her, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if trying to read between her words. "It costs time, effort, maybe your job," he said, glancing toward the kitchen where the manager's office door was still slightly ajar. She laughed softly. "Maybe. But I've learned it's worth it." His head tilted. "Learned it? What's that mean?" Clara hesitated, fiddling with the edge of her apron. "When I was younger, my mom and we didn't have much. There were days we'd sit outside a diner just like this, hoping someone would spare a little kindness. One day, someone did. A waitress, just like me, brought us a meal and said, "Pay it forward when you can." I guess it stuck with me. The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. And you're paying it forward now. Clara's smile turned wistful. I try. She rose, brushing off her apron. Let me know if you need anything else. As she walked back to the counter, she missed the faint smile tugging at the man's lips, a flicker of warmth breaking through the layers of his disguise. The hours dragged on as Clara finished her shift. The man remained in the corner, quietly observing her as she worked. She greeted every customer with the same gentle smile, whether it was the grumpy trucker who grumbled about his coffee or the young couple arguing softly over their bill. Elon, though to Clara he was still just the old beggar, watched her carefully. Her kindness wasn't performative, it was genuine. She joked with the cook, Jorge, teasing him about his uneven pancake stacks, and gave a cup of hot coffee to the delivery driver who always stopped by at the end of his route. When the diner was empty again, Clara returned to the man's table to clear his plate. "How was it?" she asked. "Best meal I've had in a long time," he said, his voice sincere. Clara beamed. "Good. You looked like you needed it." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Why do you do it? Work so hard, I mean." She paused, the question catching her off guard. "It's just how life is," she said after a moment. "I've got bills to pay, and I'm saving up for college. Someday, I want to open my own cafe. A little place where everyone feels welcome." Elon's eyes flickered with interest. "That's a big dream." "It is," Clara admitted, "but I believe in working for the things that matter." She gave him a small smile and returned to her cleaning, leaving him to his thoughts. He sat there a while longer, tapping his fingers against the table, his mind churning. Before he left, he folded a small note from his pocket, scrawled something on it, and tucked it under the salt shaker. Then, with a final glance at Clara, he shuffled out into the cold night air. When Clara found the note later, she frowned at the simple, cryptic words, "Kindness is never invisible." The next night, Clara was back at the diner. The steady rhythm of her routine was broken when her manager, Mr. Grayson, stormed out of his office, his face a thundercloud. "Clara," he barked, his voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "I need to talk to you." She wiped her hands on her apron and approached the counter where he waited, arms crossed. "What's going on?" she asked, though the unease in her stomach already told her. "Don't think I didn't see you giving away food last night," he said, jabbing a finger toward her. "This isn't a charity. You want to play saint, you can do it on your own dime, not mine." Clara straightened her shoulders, her cheeks burning. "I did pay for it," she said firmly. "That's not the point." Grayson snapped. "We're running a business here, not a soup kitchen. You pull a stunt like that again, and you're out." Clara's hands tightened into fists at her sides, but she bit back her anger. "Understood," she said quietly. As Grayson stalked back to his office, Clara felt the weight of the other employees' gazes on her. Jorge gave her a sympathetic shrug from the kitchen, and the busboy, Kevin, shot her a thumbs up from behind a stack of dishes. Elon, sitting in his corner booth once again, had heard everything. Beneath his disguise, his jaw tightened. He admired Clara's restraint, the way she handled the scolding with quiet dignity instead of lashing out. Later, as she refilled his water glass, he said softly, "You didn't deserve that." She shrugged, her smile thin. "It's part of the job." "Doesn't mean it's right," he replied. Clara didn't answer, but her eyes softened as she walked away, the sting of Grayson's words easing slightly. The morning air was crisp as Clara stepped out of the diner after her shift. Her second job as a cashier at a grocery store awaited her, and she tugged her coat tighter against the chill. She barely noticed the figure sitting on the bench outside until he called her name. "Clara." She turned, surprised to see the old man from the diner. He looked the same as before, disheveled, weary, but his eyes seemed sharper now, more focused. "Good morning," she said, offering a small smile. "What are you doing out here?" "Wanted to thank you," he said, his voice steady. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded note. "For the kindness you showed me." Clara hesitated before taking it. "You didn't have to." "I did," he interrupted gently. "Sometimes, people like you need a reminder that what you do matters." She unfolded the note carefully. The handwriting was elegant but hurried. It read, "Keep dreaming. The world needs more people like you." Beneath it was a phone number. She looked up, confused. "What's this?" "You'll find out," he said with a small, cryptic smile. Before she could ask more, he rose and shuffled away, disappearing around the corner. Clara stared after him, the note clutched tightly in her hand. Something about the encounter felt surreal, as though the man was more than he seemed. With a deep breath, she slipped the note into her pocket and continued on her way, unaware of the incredible turn her life was about to take. A week later, Clara sat nervously in a sleek conference room with walls of glass and a panoramic view of the city. She still didn't understand why she'd been invited to Tesla's headquarters. The email had been vague, mentioning an exciting opportunity and providing little else. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished table, a girl in her early 20s, wearing her best thrift store blazer and clutching a worn notebook. She felt out of place, surrounded by the clean, modern lines of the office. The door opened, and she stood quickly, her heart racing. A man walked in, his steps confident yet casual. Clara froze. It was him. Gone was the frail old beggar she'd served in the diner. In his place stood Elon Musk, one of the most recognizable faces in the world. Her jaw dropped, and she barely managed to stammer, "You're." "Yes," Elon said with a small smile, gesturing for her to sit. "Please, have a seat." She sank into the chair, her mind racing. I don't understand. What's going on?" Elon sat across from her, his expression serious but kind. "Clara, I owe you an explanation. A week ago, I disguised myself as someone in need to test a theory. I wanted to see if kindness and humanity still existed in places where people least expect it." Clara's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. "So, you were testing me?" "Not just you," he clarified. "The world. But you stood out. You didn't hesitate to help someone you thought had nothing to offer you in return. That kind of selflessness is rare." She shook her head, still trying to process. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what felt right." "And that's precisely why you're here," Elon said, leaning forward. "I want to help you, Clara. You mentioned your dream of opening a cafe. I'd like to fund it, startup capital, mentorship, whatever you need. Or, if you're interested, I can offer you a position at Tesla where your work ethic and compassion would make a difference." Clara stared at him, her hands trembling. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Elon said simply. A tear slid down her cheek as she nodded. "Yes." A year later, the cafe was bustling with life. Clara's dream had come true, a cozy, welcoming space filled with the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods. The walls were lined with photographs of smiling customers, and a small chalkboard by the counter read, "Kindness is never invisible." Elon sat quietly in a corner, sipping a latte and observing the scene. He'd slipped in unnoticed, dressed simply, content to watch Clara thrive. She moved with ease behind the counter, chatting with customers, laughing with her staff, and helping a little boy who'd spilled his hot chocolate. Her happiness was infectious, lighting up the room. As Elon finished his drink and prepared to leave, he saw Clara hand a cup of coffee and a warm sandwich to a man sitting by the door, a man with tired eyes and worn clothes. The man looked up at her, surprised. Why are you doing this? Clara smiled, her voice gentle. Everyone deserves a good meal. Elon stepped outside, the cold air biting at his cheeks, and smiled to himself. Clara hadn't just taken his help, she'd embodied the spirit of kindness he'd hoped to find. Sometimes, he thought, the smallest acts could change the world.